Oh, you've got to be kidding me. This weekend was absolutely insane. And guys, we have a ton to talk about today when it comes to the opening weekend of the Call of Duty League, breaking down all of the action. Some insane things happened, tons of headliner news. We had Parasite's debut back in the CDL, OpTic versus FaZe, Empire and the woes against the Rokkr, and so much more. And of course, I am hyped to talk about today. So we're going to try to keep this thing as short and sweet as possible. We'll see how we do. Let's get right into it. Let's go. I know it's a big cliffhanger, but first, I've got to shout out the sponsor of this video, Draft Buff. If you don't know what Draft Buff is, it's like fantasy football, but for Call of Duty. And this weekend was an absolute blast. If you didn't catch the Listener League on the podcast, I am 1-0 coming out victorious against Bash, against Sam in the Listener League. So you should definitely check out the link down in the description. You can join our Draft Royale, which is basically like DFS. You have a budget, you pick teams for each weekend, so you can compete against myself and the rest of the community in Draft Royales this weekend and the upcoming weekends. You haven't missed out. You can still join on in and have a good time, or you can join up, create a league with your friends and have a good time with that as well. Moving forward into the rest of this Call of Duty League, man. And overall, Draft Buff really is goated, so I would really appreciate it if you go down in the description or in the pinned comment, check out the link to Draft Buff and support myself, support the channel, support Draft Buff, and have some fun playing some fantasy Call of Duty. So with that said, now we can finally get into talking about this opening weekend. Let's go. Like I said, tons to talk about. Let's start with the team who kicked this thing off, the Los Angeles Thieves, with a 3-1 win over the Minnesota Rokkr, and they looked really good. And we were like, okay, does this mean that the Rokkr are bad? Does this mean the LA Thieves is good? And we saw a lot of really good things from the LA Thieves all the way through that match. After getting absolutely smoked by OpTic in the kickoff event, they looked really good in this match. And then again with the Minnesota Rokkr, with how they played later in this tournament, like, my word, LA Thieves might just have figured something out the past few weeks, and they look fantastic. So like I said, they beat the Rokkr 3-1, and then they beat the New York Subliners in a really close 3-0 series. About as close of a 3-0 series as you can have. So many close matches. We'll talk about New York Subliners in a second here. But overall, I was really impressed. Tej was putting on some performances, looking fantastic. Basically putting on some slaying masterclasses in hardpoint, and then in that control match against New York, basically saving them there on raid. So Tej was looking fantastic. They need Tej to be slaying out like that. Temp had some pretty good moments overall, and you got what you expect from Kenny and Slasher. So as a whole, really positive outlook on the weekend from LA Thieves perspective. Starting off 2-0, only losing an S&D to the Rokkr, and based off of how good the Rokkr looked in S&D on the weekend, that's not too bad of a situation at all for LA Thieves to be in. Coming in 2-0 on the weekend, you gotta feel good about them. And like I said, we'll be talking in depth about all of these teams on the podcast this week, so make sure not to miss it. It's coming out tomorrow, so be on the lookout for it. As for New York, like I said, they only played one match this weekend, of course, with their new roster. Diamondcon making his official debut as a starter in the CDL, obviously the kickoff event. A little bit different there, but New York had some time to practice with their new squad. Of course, Clay, Asim, Mac, and Diamondcon. And like I said, they were so close. Basically every single map with a chance to win at points. I mean, they absolutely blew it in that first hard point. And Clay at the back of P3 just sitting there. They could have capitalized on that situation. And then instead of trying to push again for P3, they could have just rotated to P4 to finish off the game. But instead they tried to challenge P3 one more time. Then they lost the rotations to P4, which was just a dumb call overall. I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but I did like their listening a lot. I really liked the communication that I was hearing from them. I love how Clay directs the troops. But again, sometimes there's a situation with Clay's types teams where he can get too talkative and too like directory or like too bossy. And so it'll be an interesting dynamic moving forward with how this team plays. I'm still very optimistic about this team as a whole, especially considering, you know, how well LA Thieves played in their other matches and the opponents with how good the Rokkr played as well. So considering those things, I think there's still a lot of potential here for New York moving forward, but they still got a lot of work to do as a team, and they got to figure out how to close these matches out. The S&D was really sloppy too, and then inside of the control, Mac really struggled. I'm not exactly sure what was going on there. He just wasn't playing well with his teammates. Maybe he was lagging. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he was lagging or something, but at one point in the game, he was 10 and 28 and really was just struggling to find kills, and that hurts inside of control when you're trying to play for those lives. As a whole, out of like a 10, I'd give New York maybe like a 3.2 or something, but they got a lot of work to do to move forward before they're going to be a top 6-8 team in the league right now. So now, as for Minnesota, this was interesting. Like I said, they lost to LA Thieves 3-1 in the first series of the whole weekend. But man, something clicked for them before they played Dallas on Sunday, because they came out of the gate against Dallas and looked awesome. Obviously, they lost that first hardpoint, but then they came out and ended up beating Dallas 3-2 in the series, looking insane. The S&Ds from the Rokkr, they were clutching up, playing with the ice on that squad. Accuracy and the boys were looking really, really, really good. I mean, Attach played an awesome series against Dallas as a whole, and that says something when you're playing against guys like Hook and Shotzi and Illy with the gunnies that those guys have. Attach was really, really, really impressive. And like I said, they were 3-0 on the weekend in Search and Destroy. Just overall incredibly impressive and put together. But the issue was hardpoints. They went 0-4 in hardpoints, 1-1 in controls. And so if the Rokkr can figure that out, they would be insane. The issue is, though, and my little bit of a worry with the Rokkr, with them playing like how they did so far, is that what we've seen is that early on in games, Search and Destroy is fixable, and teams can get a lot, like infinitely better in Search and Destroy over the coming like 2-3 months. That's been a trend in Call of Duty history for years and years and years. It's tougher to get better at hardpoint throughout the year. So my issue is, and wondering is, okay, can this Rokkr squad figure that out? We still need to see a little bit more from Priestahh as a whole, especially inside respawns. So I do think they still have a long ways to go before they're a full-on contender as other teams improve in Search and Destroy like Dallas. But for now, they're definitely a top 5 team, probably a top 4 team, and they did beat Dallas. It is a tough situation with S&D, because like if they replayed them, like if they replayed that series, you have to like, okay, I mean, I would give the edge to Dallas still, probably just because of the Search and Destroys and how you can flip those on their heads sometimes. But right now, Rokkr are a fun team, and S&Ds are legitly good for Minnesota, and so it'll be interesting to see how that develops moving forward. So as for Dallas, like I said, they did lose to the Rokkr 3-2 on Sunday, but previously they came out and had a pretty dominant performance against Seattle 3-0 in that series. They looked really, really good as a whole. Hook was slaying. But of course, this was before Gunless had his 240 hertz. We'll talk about that in a second as well. But really, as a whole, you've still got to feel pretty dang good about Dallas. I mean, their hard point is still pretty much untouchable. Inside control, they're by no means dominant at this point. And then inside of S&D, you know, they struggled against the Rokkr, but I still think there's still a ton of potential there with what we saw with this team at the end of last season inside of Search and Destroy, where they did struggle in the middle or early on in the year inside of S&D as a whole. And so as they start figuring out these things, ironing out some strats, I think they're going to still be insanely dangerous. And at this point, you can't feel worried if you're a Dallas fan. You'll be just fine. But you do have to figure out that S&D here pretty quick if you want to start dominating inside of that division here for the first major. Speaking of Seattle, like I said, they got, smoked against Dallas, 100-point clubbed in the first hard point. And didn't by any means look great in the S&D or the control. At least they took a round off in the control. But then Gunless realized that he was playing on 60 hertz and not 240. So then you flip the switch. Gunless is now on 240 hertz, and he comes out in their series against London and looks insane in that first hard point. Again, we're about to talk about London as well, and there's some issues there, especially inside their hard point in that first series, but Gunless was frying and looked awesome. Looney looked really good as well in that series, and so that's a really, really positive sign for Seattle moving forward. You desperately need Gunless to be an insane flex slayer for this team moving forward if you want them to succeed and dominate. And that's exactly what he did in that series and looked really, really good. But again, that series went down to the wire. They ended up going up 2-0, winning the hardpoint and the S&D, but then they really kind of choke away the control. They struggle in the hardpoint, and then it goes to a game 5 and they clutch up. And for the first time in Seattle Surge franchise history, they won both their S&Ds in a series. Let's go, Seattle. Things you love to see. Clutch it up in the S&Ds, but I do have some worries moving forward about this team still. If Gunless can stay on this trend, the 240 hertz Gunless, the Valentine's Day Pokimane Gunless, and Fry, then they're in a good spot. But that's still to be seen. It was against a team like London where you do question their slaying power, and so they get smoked against a really good team. Then they perform significantly better against another bottom 4 team right now. So they're somewhere in that 10 to 8 range of rankings. I still got some questions moving forward about Seattle. So speaking of London, again, Parasite's debut was really, really interesting. And it was a slow start for Parasite. definitely did not play well in that first hardpoint, did not play well in that first S&D either. But then things started to click a little bit for this team. That first S&D on Checkmate, again, it goes round 11, and Seattle ends up clutching up because of some craziness. Like, bro, what in the world? Octane is like laughing about it at the end because like it's so insane that like Alex just jumps right in front of him and they clutch up, and basically Seattle clutches up a 3v4 there at the end. That's tough for London, something you shouldn't lose there, and I'm sure Parasite and the squad wants that one back. Alex and Dylan definitely finally showed some of that slaying power, and you saw that from Alex inside that control, and in the hardpoint you saw Dylan doing some huge things, had some big moments as well. So I think moving forward, London still could make some noise, but for now you have to still be pretty hesitant about this team. Alex's nasty 4-piece at the end of the control in round 4 was sick, but there's just a lot of question marks with how this team's going to play moving forward. The slaying power inside of hardpoints, I just don't trust this team inside of hardpoints right now as a whole, even though they did look good in that second hardpoint in the series. So overall, they're a tough team to kind of get a good gauge for, but I still feel pretty decent about them moving forward. Same with Seattle, but that just shows to the depth of the CDL right now and how tough the competition is going to be, where like some of even the bottom 4 teams you're still pretty dang optimistic about moving forward here. And so the competition is just nuts with how this could play out with the CDL moving forward from here. So let's talk about Paris, the boys. We're wrapping them right now, and let's be honest, it wasn't a great showing for this squad. You would have liked to see a lot more from this team. Again, at points, Fire looked really, really good, and I was like, oh wow, okay, this is the Fire we were waiting to see. But like that clip that Formal said on the podcast, like, yo, Fire, you had to bring it to beat OpTic. It just wasn't there for them. OpTic came out pretty slow in that first S&D on Checkmate. They were down 3-0, and they were challenging some weird things. I tweeted about it, and I'm like, yo, like, what is OpTic doing here? They're like challenging this, like not looking good in S&D at all. They looked like legitimately stupid in S&D in those first 3 rounds. And then they started playing smarter, and they're like started playing slower, playing more patiently, playing the trades, and like legitimately actually finding each other's trades. And then their S&D started clicking. They end up winning the search and destroy, and Paris really didn't have any answers inside of the respawns. So hot 3-0 there. And then Paris lost to LAG 3-2 in a pretty tough series as a whole. And Scraps had some pretty big moments inside of control and looked really, really good in that map as a whole in that series. But as a whole, like, Paris only really did look good when they slowed down the pace and were able to play at like a really slow pace inside of the respawns. Where they struggled was when that pace got ticked up or kicked into a gear and they just couldn't keep up. And so I'm still pretty worried about this Paris team, probably a bottom 2 team right now, and not an ideal situation for Paris moving forward. Although I'm still interested to see how, you know, Fire could kick into gear here. They're definitely a bottom 2 team in my mind moving forward. So now speaking of LAG, again, they kicked off their weekend losing to FaZe 3-0. And it's just like, what are you going to expect in that series? FaZe, they came out and they looked very, very good. I mean, just played overall fundamental S&D, and you know, the control was really interesting as well. LAG didn't stand much of a chance in that series. I was interested to see if they would be able to kind of put up a fight. They just weren't in the same league by any means as FaZe as a whole. Then you go on to play Paris, and again, they beat Paris 3-2, and they made the comeback in that series. There was some shaky S&D as a whole, where I thought, you know, LAG, you know, might be a little bit more put together in S&D than they ended up showing that they were in both these series as a whole. But the positive side is the Apathy had some moments going off on Crossroads and looked awesome in that series and was just dominating. Things you absolutely love to see. So App was doing his thing and looking really, really good there. But realistically, I'm still I'm still not that optimistic about the LAG team. They were going to show some upside here. They would have needed to take a map off of FaZe, probably win that control, win that S&D at least. But that just didn't happen, and they didn't really show that upside. I'll be interested to see this upcoming weekend, since we're doing all of our predictions on the podcast tomorrow, how they match up against the Mutineers and how they match up against OpTic this upcoming weekend. That'll be an interesting one for LAG. Could be a tough start for them as a whole, but they needed that win desperately against Paris, so that's good stuff for them. Speaking of Florida, they did lose in their only match of the weekend to Toronto 3-1. Definitely a disappointing performance as a whole. And again, coming off the kickoff event, there was a lot of optimism about Florida because they beat FaZe in the kickoff event. My only issue with that was what we'll talk about with Atlanta here in a second, was that Florida beat FaZe in 2 S&Ds that weekend, coming off of a meta change where we had just GA'd the smoke grenades and the snipers like a few days before. So no teams had a lot of practice in S&D. And then Florida comes out, they lose 3-1, and the S&D did not look good. They choked in that round 10. It was not by any means fundamental, and they just really struggled as a whole, and it was pretty surprising. Definitely gives me a few worries and some hesitation for Florida moving forward. Like right now, I have more confidence in probably in the Rokkr. The slaying power, they were getting smoked by Toronto in a lot of ways. And I guess we can talk about Toronto right now as well. Toronto outplayed Florida in basically every hardpoint spawn there was. Florida was getting out-rotated, out-positioned, and just as a whole, finessed inside of hardpoint the whole series. Right now, Toronto looks like the significantly better team, more fundamental in hardpoint, better in S&D even. And so that's where I have some hesitancy with Florida right now. Now I'm a little bit nervous about them moving forward as a whole. So we're going to have to talk about a lot more about them inside of this upcoming weekend on the podcast. And then as for Toronto, man, I'm really impressed, dude. Cleanex looked awesome. He finally awoke. No pun intended to awakening. But Cleanex was finally like frying like we expected him to in the kickoff event. They are definitely a contender from here on out with how they could play. They just looked really fundamental inside of hardpoint. We'll see if teams can start picking up on their meta and how they play now that there's some little bit more film on how they want to play these maps. But right now, Toronto's really good and definitely like that top 5 type team right now. Things you love to see from Toronto. So the final 2 teams here, Atlanta and Chicago. Of course, as for Atlanta, Paris, they 3-0'd them. They looked really, really good in that series. Then OpTic Gaming, the whole OpTic series was insane. Literally every single map was down to the wire, and it was just a wild series as a whole. That first hard point, OpTic just clutched up. They had some insanely massive kills there. We're gonna talk about both these teams at the same time, basically. They had some massive kills in that series. Like, okay, in that first hard point, all right, OpTic clutched up. The clutch genes came through. FaZe kind of choked the rotation right at the end of that game. I was like, oh man, that's tough for FaZe. You really should have won that, and they choke it away. And let's be honest, I did feel good going into this weekend. I had predicted FaZe winning this match 3-2, and that they would rebound in the S&Ds. And boy, oh boy, did they rebound in the S&Ds. They smoked OpTic 6-0 on Miami, which was nuts. Scump, he struggled, man. 0-6 in the S&Ds, which I would like to see a stat on how many times Scump has gone 0-6 in his career. Like, it's gotta be like, has it ever happened? I don't know. I truly have no idea, because getting 6-0'd by FaZe, Scump going 0-6 is insane. And FaZe just looked really, really impressive inside of those S&Ds. And then the control match was just insane, down to the wire, 3-2 back and forth. And OpTic ended up clutching up in that control match. And then you head to a hard point on Moscow where Abezy just went insane. And of course, if you're an OpTic fan, you were probably sick of hearing the name Abezy during the series, because he was going off inside of the S&Ds, just challenging everything and winning like these first bloods and doing work. And inside the hard point, like what you're seeing here, I mean, Abezy clutched up on the P3, and then on the rotation to P4, he had the insane 3-piece that you've probably seen already, but he went insane. I'm showing it right here, but Abezy just clutched up. FaZe made it happen on that rotation, and they win the hardpoint force of game 5. And then on Moscow S&D, what was OpTic doing, bro? They had no answers. They just had nothing. I would love to hear from OpTic like how much S&D they had played. I know they had mentioned it on the podcast a few times, I think, about how much S&D they had played, and it sounded like they've been playing a lot of AM teams to get that practice in, but my goodness, it did not come through here against FaZe, and FaZe outclassed them in basically every single aspect of search and destroy, trading their kills way more effectively. And in the end of rounds, FaZe just played way better with trading their kills, playing together as a squad towards the bomb sites. OpTic felt just a little bit lost. But again, as for OpTic, you've got to feel good still that their respawn is obviously really good. Like, it stacks up against, you know, any of the great teams. They'll be just fine moving forward. So OpTic fans should not be tilting. Like, shocker, a formal and Scump OpTic team is struggling in S&D early in the season. Like, when have we heard this one before? Oh wait, like every single year. So they'll be just fine. As for FaZe, I mean, who's the best team in the game right now? Is it FaZe or is it Empire? If Empire lost to Rokkr and then FaZe plays OpTic, kind of feels like the best team. Whoever wins this series becomes the best team in the league, and FaZe comes out and plays insane S&D. Again, it's a little bit weird to search and destroy moving forward. where like if OpTic rebounds and starts catching up on S&D, they'll be just fine and be in that debate still for the best team in the league. The S&D is a factor right now, and we'll have to see how much work that these teams can do moving forward into this upcoming weekend in regards to how they play in S&D and their respawns as a whole. So my goodness, that was a marathon. I hope we can cut this thing down to around 20 minutes. I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to be, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, drop all your thoughts down below, your comments down below about what I got right, what I got wrong. I did feel pretty good overall about my predictions for this weekend, and they came out, you know, pretty much happened as a whole, but I'll be very excited to see what happens with the podcast and how we predict this upcoming weekend of Call of Duty. So if you guys enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, be on the lookout for the podcast tomorrow. But as always, guys, I'm your boy, Salvation Elite, and guys, we will see you next time. I'm out.